Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report. As I always make clear, this show has a single purpose, holding the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. And to do so, we don't just focus on the bad behavior of individual cops. Instead, we examine the system that makes bad policing possible. And today, we will achieve that goal by showing this video revealing how an already troubled police department manufactured drunk driving charges against multiple victims, a startling example of how incentivizing law enforcement is both destructive and dangerous. But before we get started, I want you watching to note that if you have evidence of police misconduct, please email it to us privately at par@therealnews.com, and please like, share, and comment on our videos. You know I read your comments and that I appreciate them. And of course, you can always reach out to me directly at Tayas Baltimore on Facebook or Twitter. And of course, if you can, please hit the Patreon donate link pinned in the comments below, because we do have some extras there for our PAR family. Okay, we've gotten all that out of the way. Now, one of the most troubling aspects of law enforcement that we have covered on this show is incentivized policing. That is, the idea that cops are offered perks or promotions with the expectation that they write more tickets or make more arrests, regardless if they are warranted or not. And as we have seen time and time again across this country, communities both small and large have been irreparably harmed by this idea. That's why when we received this video from a civil rights lawyer in Loveland, Colorado, we knew immediately we had to cover the story. It's body camera footage from a police officer making an arrest for drunk driving. The problem is, according to his attorney, the evidence, the facts of the case, and even the officer's own body camera video, the charges are false. Now, before I proceed, I want to make one thing clear. Drunk driving is a terrible, destructive crime. You don't need to check statistics to understand how much havoc drunk drivers wreak on innocent people. But conversely, false DUIs can also have a huge impact on people's lives, as we will see later in the show, which is why law enforcement has to be both measured and precise in how it enforces the laws designed to stop it. Which brings me back to the video you are seeing now and the questionable arrest it depicts. First, let me set the scene a bit. The city where this occurred, Loveland, Colorado, is already under fire for a series of allegations of police misconduct. In fact, the community just an hour north of Denver has already made national headlines for a series of troubling arrests which we have covered on this show. Among them was this: the arrest of 73-year-old Karen Garner for allegedly stealing $14 worth of goods from a Walmart. The police officer decided that the woman, who suffers from dementia, was worthy of a brutal arrest. Which is why, when we received this video of an allegedly false DUI arrest, along with a major civil rights lawsuit that claims other bogus charges, we knew we had to cover it. In fact, this federal lawsuit says the city of Loveland was actually making money off DUIs and thus aggressively pushed them despite the cost to innocent civilians. The story starts on January 4th, 2020, when Loveland police officer William Gates was actually patrolling outside the city limits as part of a special DUI initiative. According to this lawsuit, that's when Gates spotted Colorado resident Harris Elias driving home from his girlfriend's house. Gates pulls over Elias because he was apparently driving too slowly, going roughly 17 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. Wow, that doesn't seem too dangerous to me, but let's listen as he explains to Elias the alleged pretext for stopping his car.
Good. Hey, Officer Gates, the reason I stopped you, you didn't signal your lane change, and we're going about 15 to 18 miles an hour in a 45-mile-an-hour zone. No, you moved from the center lane over to the left lane, and you failed to signal your lane change. Yeah. All right, you have a driver's license and insurance with you?
But Officer Gates was just getting started. After Elias attempts to explain his confusion of not being familiar with the area, which is why he slowed when crossing the intersection, Gates, dissatisfied, makes an accusation that he smells alcohol and then asks questions with fraught consequences. Let's listen.
How much have you had to drink tonight? I said, how much have you had to drink tonight? You don't want to answer that question? Okay. Well, I smell the overwhelming odor of alcohol coming from your vehicle.
Now, when Gates asks if Elias has been drinking, it's at that moment Elias makes a critical decision. Unnerved by Gates' questionable reason for stopping him, Elias refuses to answer any more questions due to his concerns about the officer's integrity. And that's when Officer Gates decides to up the stakes of the encounter by, of all things, arresting him.
So how much have you had to drink?
I'm not going to answer any questions.
Okay. Would you want to do some voluntary tests for me to make sure that you're safe to drive? Nope. Okay. All right, go ahead and turn around, face your vehicle. Sure. Place your hands behind your back, interlace your fingers with your palms together.
So, with no actual evidence Elias had been drinking, no reckless driving, no slurred speech, or any other obvious signs of intoxication, Gates decides again to press forward with the presumption that Elias has to be guilty of something, asking him to take a breathalyzer at the station. Let's watch.
So go ahead and take a deep breath and hold it for 3 seconds. I'll hang on to the tube. All right, go ahead and blow as hard as you can and as long as you can. Okay, that's good. All right, go ahead and have a seat. Your breath test came back not consistent with your driving actions and your mannerisms. So would you be willing to take a blood test?
So, with Elias blowing a 0.00, one would think this ordeal would be over, meaning a man whose only infraction was to drive too slowly and apparently didn't use his turn signal should be at the worst let go, or perhaps even offered an apology. But that's not what happened. Instead, Gates not only still insisted Elias was drunk, but now asked him to take a blood test. Take a look.
Your mannerisms as you exited the vehicle, your eyes, things like that, your driving actions, they're not consistent. I understand that you blew triple zeros, so that leads me to believe that there's something else going on.
I'm under stress. My freedom is at stake, sir, and you're out of line.
Okay, then go ahead and put your hands on the handcuffs. We'll just call this a refusal.
I never refused, sir. I simply asked to read the form.
Okay, well, and again, I've explained the form to you a number of times, okay? So, refusal to submit to a chemical test can result in the administrative sanctions against your driving privilege. Okay.
So do I have an opportunity to sign the form or not? Do I have an opportunity to read the form?
Here's the deal. I'm not going to play this game, okay?
I'm not playing a game, sir. This is my freedom that you're talking about.
Lower your voice.
A decision which put him in handcuffs and eventually led to him being strapped into a leather belt, all for nothing. Just watch.
That's okay. I mean, let's take whatever
Just
the names are.
Okay, go ahead and face the wall. And
I'm sorry. Say it one more time.
Just face the wall for me. And I'll cuff you in the front and I'll tick you. Yeah, it's no trouble for me. It's just understand that I can't, put you in a room with things that you could hurt yourself with, as crazy as that sounds. I mean, it's the same reason that we have plastic pens that you can't hurt yourself with.
So it's worth noting that Elias is a pilot, so even the hint that he was drinking and driving would have devastating consequences for his career. In fact, despite the lack of evidence against him, this arrest continues to haunt the Colorado resident who's doing nothing more than driving home. But it turns out there's more to this story than just a bad arrest, and for that, I'm going to be speaking to Elias's lawyer, Colorado civil rights attorney Sarah Shelkey. But first, I'm joined by my reporting partner, Stephen Janis, who's been reviewing the lawsuit and has some of the data related to the case. Stephen, thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Stephen, what were the results from the blood test, and what has subsequently happened to the charges against Mr. Elias?
Well, similar to the breathalyzer, the blood test came out with nothing, absolutely nothing, nothing in his system whatsoever. So prosecutors immediately dropped the charges after the blood test came back. So the blood test only accentuated what was apparent in the field, which was the breathalyzer came back 0.0. This man had nothing in his system.
So first, the Loveland Police Department has been participating in a program that incentivizes DUI arrests. Now, you've been doing some research on it. Can you tell us a little more about it?
What this case reveals is the wonderful collaboration between capitalism and law enforcement, and just how wonderful those results are for all of us people in the working class. Because as you can see in Loveland and in many departments across the country, they can apply for grants to pay for officers. There's just one catch. You got to make a lot of arrests. They might not be good arrests. They might be unjust arrests like we just saw. But the point is, more money, more arrests. I think that's the problem here. Loveland actually took in $250,000 from one of these programs. They had time competitions to see how many people they could arrest in a certain amount of time. They got trophies. So really, is that what you want at the core of your criminal justice system? An incentive to do more for money? I don't think so.
Now, there was some fallout from this lawsuit already. Can you talk about that?
Well, as you know, you pointed out, and it's very important. The chief resigned from Loveland, almost a week after the lawsuit dropped. So even though the police had said, "Oh, this is a good arrest, we stand behind it," which is what they always do, the police chiefs decided it was time to leave town. Maybe Loveland's had enough. I don't know. We'll see.
I'm happy to be joined again by civil rights attorney Sarah Shelkey to talk to her about the lawsuit, her fight against bad policing, and what changes she would like to see in law enforcement in general. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me. Now, there have been an unusually large number of false arrests for DUIs by Loveland police, where at least 4 people have been arrested and later shown to have 0% blood alcohol level. What kind of impact do these false arrests have on people's lives? I mean, there are emotional consequences like stress, of course, but doesn't this have economic and social consequences too?
For sure, there is. You know, DUIs really are a horrific affliction on our society when actually DUI is being committed. And for that reason, there's a lot of stigma associated with DUIs. There's some very heavy consequences that come from being charged with DUI. And what a lot of people don't realize is how quickly those consequences come into play after an arrest. It's not like anybody waits for the case to be adjudicated. Nobody waits until there's a conviction. The consequences are quick and severe. It's the DMV starts actions to take your license away. Most employers have reporting requirements. If you get charged with a DUI, people lose their jobs. There's all kinds of fines and associated requirements that just go with being on pretrial monitoring prior to anybody even deciding whether it was rightfully charged. And then there's just also just the humiliation and the embarrassment that goes with it. The lawsuit I'm doing on behalf of Harris Elias here in this case, it, really illustrates that to a large degree because he has 3 teenage kids and a zero tolerance drinking and driving policy. And his night here ended with him having to call them from the police station to pick him up and get him for having been arrested for DUI. So, as a law-abiding citizen, it's hard to think of worse or more harsh consequences that could come so quickly just from being charged as there are associated with DUI. And that's why this is just when it's becoming such a big practice and it being this incentivized cash cow for police departments to charge people that it's so devastating and damaging for not just the individuals but for society as a whole.
What is the motive for police to make these unlawful arrests?
So it's crazy. If I have one tagline to say about this lawsuit and so much else of what I do with anything involving the police, it's that there should never be incentives to arrest people for specific crimes. That the whole idea of it is completely perverse, because it's not like a police agency can say, we need more arrests what would be great is if you guys could get a whole bunch of robberies tonight. That doesn't work. But it's the nature of a DUI offense that makes it possible to do these incentive structures because it becomes so subjective and it becomes so much the officer's own discretion and the officer's own account of what they're saying they smelled, which we can't ever disprove later, or these little micro things that they're going to tell us we can't see on video. And when it's really the unique nature of a DUI offense, and then combined with the fact that there's funding available, it's almost like as a result of all the stigma we have as a society for DUI crimes and how much we'd really like this offense to stop occurring, which is a totally appropriate and admirable, purpose for any civilized society to have. The issue is how we've gone about it, because now there's all these grant programs that are set up that are basically saying, the more DUI arrests you have going on, or the more you can show us that you have a DUI problem in your local area, the more money we'll give you. And as you can imagine, the cycle that starts to then perpetuate is that, police chiefs and people in charge at various departments go, you know what I would like is more funding, so that I can get more officers and more equipment. Here's a way to get more funding. And all we need to do to get that funding is convince them that we have a DUI arrest problem. So go make more DUI arrests and we'll get the funding. They do that. And then at the end, it's like, how's it going? Not very well. Look how many DUI arrests we have. And they're going to buy more officers. They're going to buy more equipment. They're going to set up competitions. I mean, there's timed competitions going on to get the most DUI arrests. And it's, it's grotesque once you stand back and look at kind of like the whole interconnected web of what we've woven here for and what police are doing. But it's also very foreseeable as a result of making those kinds of incentives because, ultimately, a police chief's job is to ensure that the department has more funding and that all of the officers have a sense of purpose. And when you get to basically manufacture the crime that gives you continued justification for funding and feeling self-important, things get very messy. And Loveland's case, I think, is just a very obvious example of that, how bad that can go.
Are there any consequences for police officers who have a pattern of making unlawful arrests?
Not in this case, and that is a big underlying, driving factor just for me as a civil rights attorney in this case is that in the thousands and thousands of dollars and many, many, many hours of work in terms of open records requests that I've done, trying to uncover the problem, trying to locate where the funding is coming from, trying to find how it's meted out, trying to get numbers on who has the most arrests, comparing those to other officers, who maybe aren't as competitive, basically. In doing all of that, what I'm seeing is just that there is not once has there been a consequence for a bad arrest, and that is wrong. I mean, to just put it bluntly, when you have somebody who their numbers, their DUI arrest numbers are so much higher than everybody else that it should be like a red flag. They're cutting some kind of corner or they're maybe arresting some people they shouldn't, something where you should inspect. And in this case, Officer Gates, who we've sued, his numbers are crazy. I mean, they're shocking to look at. There's so much I could say about the numbers that we got on this guy, but in any event, they're so starkly different from other officers working similar shifts that anybody in charge should be looking and going, my God, are you arresting like some innocent people? Let's at least take a look. If somebody had done that here, they would have seen that, in fact, he was doing a lot of that. And you would think there should be some kind of consequences, like that you're like wrecking people's lives. A lot of people don't realize that there's or officers, I think in particular, that there is a third option where if you think maybe this person had a drink, but you're so preoccupied with not risking anybody, being on the road, even with one drink in them, you can just call someone to pick you up. And instead, because of the incentive structure and the value and the awards, the reputational kind of currency that you get by getting the DUI arrest, nobody ever considers that. They just swoop everybody up in the net and say, with really such utter callousness for what it does to their lives and everything, they'll there's no reason to treat people fairly. The only reasons that they have are to increase their numbers. And in this case, Chief Ticer, who is he's now resigned and gone to another police department. But while he was here, he was very interconnected with the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, with multiple councils on drunk driving. And what I thought was very unsurprising, but of course, still kind of interesting and shocking, was that when the lawsuit came out, and everybody was, coming to them saying, what is going on here? His main response was to still defend the wrongful arrest. I mean, he's even made a statement saying that my client's arrest, Mr. Elias, who blew zeros at the station and then was forced to do blood, and then his blood came back all zeros and everything and negative for all drugs, the chief still said, we think this was a solid arrest. I mean, if that's what your chief is saying, when you even this far after the fact and you know what it did, to devastate his life, that means that, what's going on behind closed doors in that police department is exactly the picture that I suspected from the incentive structure that they've set up.
It seems there is a specific officer, in this case, Officer Gates, who's making these arrests. Do you think there is any chance of criminal action against him for this?
It's Officer Gates, and he has received a trophy, a literal trophy. I featured the photograph throughout my amended complaint because it's gratuitous. It's like a big old, literal, like big gold trophy. And what happens is, just one example is that, like, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, here at the MAD Colorado, they have this competition they do a few times a year. They call it Tie One On for safety. And if a department wants to participate, they get 48 hours. And whoever gets the most DUI arrests will receive a trophy and a portable breath test machine, which is expensive. And they get that in a ceremony. They have their pictures taken, and they get all this adulation on their Facebook page. And then the officers who are involved also can get individual awards from MAD for having the most arrests. And then they add that to their CVs, and, onward the cycle goes.
Now, the brazenly false arrest of Mr. Elias by Loveland Police Officer Gates reveals a stark contrast and a bias embedded in the culture of American law enforcement. That is, no matter how destructive or illegal the behavior of a cop, there are few, if any, consequences, which is why this case is so problematic. I mean, just think about what we just heard from Elias's lawyer. Due to this one fraudulent encounter with a reckless police officer, an innocent man will have to spend the rest of his life answering for and explaining the charge that resulted from a false arrest. Which raises another question. What are the consequences for Officer Gates? What's going to happen to a man who, when presented with clear evidence, simply ignored and unlawfully took the freedom of an innocent man? Well, not for nothing, but I would imagine that nothing is all he'll get. But why? Well, as we have seen over and over again, no matter how carelessly police apply the law, and no matter how devastating the consequences are for the individuals they target, there are rarely any repercussions for the cop in question. In fact, it's more than likely that an officer who executes an illegal arrest and in the process destroys someone's life will simply walk away from the matter scot-free. Don't believe me? Well, consider the case of at least a dozen Los Angeles Police Department officers who were accused of falsely identifying residents as gang members. The errant IDs were part of a program where officers would add names of unsuspecting civilians to gang databases, which would lead to all sorts of problems for the people identified as such. A series of lawsuits against the officers outlines how these unsuspecting non-gang members suffered all sorts of devastating consequences, including the inability to obtain housing, qualify for a job, and continued harassment by law enforcement. The allegations against these officers led to charges of obstructing justice and perjury against the cops in question, a case that was touted as an example of a justice system capably undertaking the task of policing itself. But as I imagine you've already guessed, the case against the corrupt cops fell apart, and all the charges against them have been dropped. 3 cops were cleared after an LA County judge tossed their charges due to insufficient evidence. Prosecutors have subsequently dropped charges against another half a dozen officers due again, supposedly, to lack of evidence. In total, 25 officers accused of falsely labeling innocent people gang members have either been cleared before a day in court or not charged at all. My point is, can we even imagine a scenario where a private citizen engaged in such a destructive act was given a free pass by law enforcement? I mean, Officer Gates thought driving too slow was a heinous crime. It's funny that investigators aren't similarly offended by the idea of falsely accusing someone of a crime. In fact, Let's contrast the diligence of the Loveland police for charging regular citizens with bogus crimes with the ability of law enforcement to hold the lying LA cops accountable, and in doing so, perhaps reveal just how powerful American police have become and how hypocritical our system of justice can be. First, we have a department that has shot a couple's young dog, violently arrested a 73-year-old woman with dementia over $14 worth of products, arrested a Good Samaritan for not showing his ID at a motorcycle accident scene, and now made false DUI arrests, all in pursuit of profit. A department, by the way, situated in a fairly crime-free city that is often touted as a northern Colorado's hiker's paradise, full of walking trails and breathtaking scenery. And for all this mayhem and chaos created in a community, not to mention lawsuit settlements, not a single officer has faced legal consequences, including Loveland Police Chief Taya, who quietly resigned and quickly got a job as police chief of Prescott Valley, Arizona Police Department. Let's contrast that with the over 25 Los Angeles police officers who lied. Let me emphasize the word lied by falsely accusing civilians of being gang members, wreaking havoc on their lives by making it difficult to rent apartments, get a job, or move freely without being harassed by cops. The consequences for these rogue cops? Zero. But let's take a look at the arrest of Mr. Elias. Accused of traveling too slowly, he blows triple zeros on a breathalyzer and politely, and may I emphasize, politely chose to exercise his constitutional rights in order to protect himself from an illegal arrest. Still, he is put in handcuffs, humiliated, forced to take a blood test, and faced false charges. And the consequences for him? A lifelong scarlet letter on his record, jeopardizing his job and livelihood, an investigation into his life by the FAA, and the probable scorn that comes when most people assume, well, you must have been doing something wrong. So as we can see here, a cop illegally uses the law, ruins a life, and walks away unscathed. A citizen can be completely innocent, have done nothing wrong, and suffer lifelong consequences. A cop can falsely accuse you of being a gang member and collect a full salary, while a futile investigation into his or her crimes evaporates. An innocent motorist can be completely absolved or proven innocent of an alleged crime, but continue to suffer under the concept of presumed guilt for the rest of his life. I think you can see where this comparison is headed. I mean, how can we sustain faith in law enforcement if their execution of the law is so faithless? How can we trust the institution of American policing if they can't be trusted to police themselves? These are the questions we have to answer if we want to build a better community. And I'm sure the institutions we trust with enforcing the law will one day be worthy of that trust. I would like to thank civil rights attorney Sarah Shelkey for speaking with us and for her work to protect the constitutional rights of the public. Thank you, Sarah. And of course, I want to thank intrepid reporter Stephen Janis for his writing, research, and editing on this piece. Thank you, Stephen.
Tay, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And I want to thank the mods of the show, Noli D and Lacey R, for their support. Thank you both. And a very special thanks to our Patreons. We appreciate you, especially Shane Bushta and Pineapple Girl. Thank you for being PAR super friends. And I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us and we might be able to investigate for you. Please reach out to us. You can email us tips privately at par@therealnews.com and share your evidence of police misconduct. You can also message us at Police Accountability Report on Facebook or Instagram, or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can always message me directly at Taya's Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. And please like and comment. I do read your comments and appreciate them, even if I can't answer every single one. And we do have a Patreon link pinned in the comments below. So if you do feel inspired to donate, please do. We don't run ads or take corporate dollars, so anything you can spare is truly appreciated. My name is Taya Graham, and I'm your host of the Police Accountability Report. Please be safe out there.